Hello again. I'm Renee Robbins, and I'm the industry programmer here at TIFF. Thank you for joining us again for this very, very exciting session. Actually, I'm a little bit even more excited before I read the official introduction that I've written. A little bit more excited because the conversation that was happening in the green room right now, you guys are really in for a very powerful conversation, very powerful discussion that's about to happen here on stage. And now to the official introduction that I've written. Our upcoming session on creating resonance is somewhat of a follow-up of a panel from the world building. Earlier I presented the question, now that we have created these storied worlds, how do we populate them? Representations of gender and diversity continue to conflict the film industry, behind and in front of the camera. And as we all know, audience demographics and countless studies, they all tell us that broader representation is good for creative media. But somehow, we continue to lag on changing these realities. One of the things that was most important to us when designing this discussion is that we focus on strategies that respond and resonate. Leading our discussion today is Kay Armitage. And Kay is a professor of cinema studies and women and gender studies at the University of Toronto, and a member of the board of Women in View. Kay is an author, academic, producer, director, and was also one of the founding international programmers here at TIFF. So I kind of want to be Kay when I grow up. All right, ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, please help me welcome our panel on creating resonance and moderator Kay Armitage.
Okay. Hi. Glad to see you. We only have an hour for this panel, so we're going to move as quickly as we can to issues of strategy. First, I'm going to introduce the panel. I think that, sorry, I'll go in the order that I have them here. Marie, to my right, Laura Mungai, is the co-founder of Restless Talent Management and the founder and CEO of Buni TV and Buni, is that right? Media. Her Restless Management is the first global company focused on African talent. Ben Roberts, at the end, is the director of the BFI, British Film Institute Film Fund. And he's responsible for overseeing the BFI lottery funds that are given out for production. Nicole Bernard is Executive Vice President of Audience Strategy for the Fox Group. She oversees the company's audience strategy department. Very glad to see that term in here, which was launched 3 years ago to identify not only new talent, but programming content as well. And last, Karen Lunder, who is EVP Production, Film Nation. She's a development and production executive in both the studio system and the New York independent film community. So we're going to start with Nicole. She probably represents the largest single entity of all of us. Maybe BFI is a close second.
I don't think we're a close second.
And let's be clear, I am not all Fox. So,
no, of course.
But I will say, we're here to talk about strategies, and I want to qualify my opening statements with the idea about strategies is something we talked about backstage, being resonant with your culture and your corporate culture, your business culture, your organization's culture. So the strategies that I refer to are those that we've identified that work, we believe, will be resonant across the Fox entertainment cultures. The Audience Strategy Department is a cross-divisional division that works across the entertainment businesses, and more recently with our international entertainment businesses. So that's Fox Broadcast Network, the cable network, digital studios, the TV studios, which, as you've probably read, a TV studio and the broadcast network are somewhat combined now with our chairman to form the Fox Television Group, as well as sports, to identify and develop strategic resources for those departments, those divisions to tap into, to augment their efforts to diversify workforce, creative workforce, executive workforce, creative personnel, writers, directors, producers, as well as programming and content. And I allowed myself to be elected to go first as we talked about the breadth of what we consider our strategic approach to diversity. And I say diversity with my own air quotes because at Fox and with audience strategy, there's a reason why we did not form the department with the idea of being a diversity or diversity and inclusion initiative, program, or department. And it is obviously not because of an aversion to diversity. Diversity itself is an ideal and a platform that I solidly believe in, but that the world has so much changed that it was almost like the tail wagging the dog to do so, and that what we wanted to focus on are resources that would allow our businesses to better tap into the viewers, the consumers, the new America, the global demographic shifts that really are the true definition of diversity, as opposed to something that felt more, something that we'd moved past, more away from, and moving toward what the future looks like, which is simply the true and authentic engagement of people, all of our viewers and consumers.
I'm going to pass to Marie.
Well, I'm very excited to hear that that's how Fox sees the future, the world of entertainment, and also to have the other members of the panel and to see how much of an interest there is for this. I started Restless Talent Management earlier this year with my partner, Tendeka Matatu. Being both producers, working in Africa and producing African content, we have always had this idea of how can we bring to the world the wealth of talent that we see over there. In the past couple of years, I'm sure everybody here is aware, there's been a lot of African talent that has burst on the scene. Obviously, 12 Years a Slave was a very big event. But I was here in Toronto last year. There was many big films with talents of African origin in there. So something that we always knew is now starting to become slightly more mainstream, and we want to have a part in doing this. What we have identified as a major problem as producers is that a lot of these raw talents, one, didn't have access to opportunities to grow when it comes to interaction with others in the industry, to workshops, to training sessions, to meeting with proper producers, and to being introduced to the world at large as a talent that has been properly packaged, because it's also obviously a business. So that's what we do now for African talents. We're the first ones to do that. We currently represent talents from all across Africa, screenwriters, directors, and actors, and even looking at actors and talents from the African diaspora, and trying to present them to the world so that their talent can be also used globally. So that's what we're doing, and I'm glad to see that there's interest from the rest of the world.
Karen?
Hi, I'm Karen Lunder from Film Nation. So I am largely in charge with my colleagues of crafting our development slate and producing the films that Film Nation makes beyond the titles that we also sell. You know, we're both a sales, financing, and production company. And we're very internationally driven because the company is based in foreign sales, and therefore that's where the money that's the driver for the financing of our budgets. And like pretty much everyone, I think, in this room probably, we are servicing movies for the world. And having started in the independent film world in New York and migrated into the studio world, where I was totally just servicing American, domestic-driven fare, and then coming to Film Nation, I've found that there's this cohesion that's happened over time where everybody, whether you're at a studio or an independent company, is trying to tell stories that are going to resonate around the world. And what we've seen and identified for ourselves over the last couple of years in particular, and I'm going to back up for 1 sec because I know we're not talking about stats here, but before coming to this panel, I started to read just a little bit about what's going on both in diversity in an encompassing way, whether it's race, gender, et cetera, in film, and there's a lot of conversation about the representation of women on screen with all of these movies that have become successes, be it Hunger Games Catching Fire with Jennifer Lawrence, or Gravity with Sandy Bullock, or Lucy with Scarlett Johansson. There's also been a lot of talk about the death of box office this summer and why aren't movies working and performing the way that everyone hoped they would. Where is the stagnation and lack of growth coming from? And outside of all the competition beyond going to the movies that we all know exists with the internet and television and everything else, the one sort of resounding thing I keep seeing in the conversation is that it's about not repeating what's already existed on screen before, that audiences are no longer being duped by coming out for the exact same story, sort of pitched the exact same way. They want to be surprised, they want something new. And that sort of thankfully is what Film Nation's mandate has become, because when we started out on the production side, we were kind of doing what the other international sales companies were doing, which is we were looking for that action film that could have a male lead, most likely white, in their mid-30s to mid-50s, that could do the box office of something like Taken. And we discovered that none of us are good at that, because we just don't really love those films or frankly know how to make them well. And they weren't the things that were really moving forward on our slate. And then when we looked at the movies that we make both as a sales company or as a financier or as a production company, they were the more unique stories. They were things that were for more specific audiences, maybe for adult women or for adults over 40, or had filmmakers that were from diverse backgrounds and while had different perspectives to offer. So while I wouldn't say that Film Nation has a strategy for diversity, because it's not something we talk about every day, that we're going to go out and make sure that Film Nation has more female directors than anyone else, or has more diverse talent on screen than anyone else. It's happening naturally by the fact that our mandate is to tell unique stories. And if you look at, and then I will shut up, where there is success and diversity on screen, it's largely coming from people creating their own stories. So whether it's someone like Lena Dunham, starting with tiny furniture and going to girls and now pretty much being her own brand, or Tina Fey, or Melissa McCarthy, you can name all kinds of people, just focusing on the women for a moment. There are opportunities to connect with an audience, and once you do that, whether your movie is a micro budget or an indie or a slightly larger, more star-driven vehicle, it opens the door for more films and for more directors who are starting with those first films to connect with the audience, and that more originality that succeeds begets further originality that succeeds. That's kind of where we are as a company and where we focus on this issue.
Ben?
Well, I think I should start by just saying what the BFI is, because we're, to the Canadians in the room, I guess we're a little bit telefilm, a little bit TIFF. We're a combination of activities. We look after the National Film and Television Archive in the UK. We look after all the lottery funding, public funding for film development and production, and audience development as well, and education. We also run the National Cinematheque on the South Bank in London. So the reason I mention that is because when I joined the BFI a couple of years ago, my most immediate colleagues in the office were the curatorial team who look after the archive. And next year we're running a big project called Britain on Film, which will pull out films from the last 100 years or so, and show what the UK was looking like at any point in time over the last 100 years. And for me, that places a big responsibility on what we're doing in film development and production today, when I've jump forward 50, 100 years' time to make sure that what we are working on with filmmakers, both on screen, stories behind the camera, is equally representative. So I think for me, being the sort of the public body in the room, if you like, you know, there's an obvious obligation that comes with public funding to make sure that you are using it fairly and equally, but sadly that hasn't been the case for quite a long time. And there is a very live debate in Britain at the moment around diversity, representation, both on television and in film. It's being driven by one of our ministers in government, and we are all absolutely being sort of held to account. I started attending a number of sessions like this about a year ago, and the general mood in the room was just one of intense frustration that conversations, which had probably been going on for some 15 or 20 years, weren't really moving forward. You know, we talked backstage about the landscape is littered with aborted diversity schemes, which generally lasted roughly as long as the executive who introduced them until they left whatever job they're in. So we're equally sort of scheme phobic. And I sort of determined instead to figure out a way in which we could just properly embed a diversity obligation into everything that we did. And that diversity for us is accepting that it's not going to be the same thing all the time. So we don't have it's not a specific focus on race or gender or disability or sexual orientation. It's whatever is most appropriate to the material that we're looking at. And we have devised some funding guidelines, which I won't bore everyone with now, but I would encourage everybody to go to our website and have a look at them, because they are sort of spelled out to the letter. And actually, on September the 1st, we made them mandatory for all production funding that we are going to support or award in the UK. I think there are some distinctions when we come to talking about strategies that differ between, for example, television broadcasters, particularly in the UK, who are both the producer, the distributor. They are speaking directly to an audience. You know, it's that for broadcasters and also for the studios, I think it is not easy, but it is a straightforward sole responsibility to determine what you are going to do in terms of diversity, and you can see it through. In the independent film world, there are so many pieces of the equation which factor into the success of a broad range of filmmaking that I'm very aware that even if we determine to make all our funding carry some diversity requirements, we are only a piece of the funding landscape. So it's very much a kind of a shared responsibility, and the independent sector will continue to have some problems until exhibition, distribution, broadcasters who acquire rights, private financiers, all share the same responsibility or see the commercial opportunities in promoting diverse range of storytelling and filmmakers. And I think that's, it's important to acknowledge that none of us can solve it. It's very much a shared problem.
Do you mind?
Yes, no,
We had this conversation backstage, and I know many of you have had this conversation, and in terms of what you say schemes, so we're saying programs. I mentioned that we don't like to call anything that we're doing a program, because it feels, in the Americas, again, this is about cultural differences, whether it's regional differences or organizational differences. What will resonate most with your culture, so that we can look beyond the data and the statistics, because we know what they are, and put into action those mechanisms, or as I'd like to think about them, resources that we evangelize to our organizations and our businesses to tap into to drive change. So what we'd like to focus on most in terms of that strategic approach is not the data, because again, it speaks for itself, and you're either going to recognize it as a way to, and pay attention to it as a means by which to grow your business. It's just another part of your research to grow your business, or you're going to recognize it, read about it, and ignore it because it doesn't seem to impact you. So in terms of strategic thinking within our entertainment culture, we're thinking about resources that will help you grow your business, should you choose to tap into it. So rather than refer to diversity initiatives or programs as a mandate, because I haven't seen it work, you better or else, the finger wagging, financial incentives tend to incentivize most people, whether it's around this topic or anything else. You hit them in the pocket and it works, but then it starts to feel like a penalty. And something that myself and my team have talked about a lot in the senior leadership as we built out our strategic approach to building resources was a simple conversation about business growth. At the end of the day, whether you're speaking to your executive director at a nonprofit, to yourself for your own business, to a board of directors, if you're defining business, your success at the end of the year, it usually somehow involves growth. In our businesses, it's around distribution, the growth of viewership or consumer. So how best to sell more? That is to tell great stories authentically, and you're more likely to be able to do that with a workforce and stories and storytellers that are representative of your market, of your consumer, so you know your audience. And if you're looking at those statistics for no other reason but to know who your audience is, you'll see that the global shifts in the United States, across the globe, are defining those audiences, and naturally, they'll want to be engaged by diverse stories and storytelling, rather than you better hire someone who could tell this story or else. It hasn't worked well or resonated within our businesses, and what we're finding success in thus far is, and we want to be able to quantify it sooner rather than later, is the basic conversation, business conversation, that diverse is not philanthropy. Diverse is not charity. When you're hiring a woman, a director, storyteller, businesswoman, an ethnically diverse person, anyone of color, it is not the right thing to do. It might just be the smart thing to do as a part of diversifying your workforce that will allow you to better tap into the storytelling that's most resonant with the broader community. And I believe it is a statistic that I'm happy to quote to some degree, because it's written all over in business books and the trades, that the most diverse organizations, no matter how you define that organization, are more successful and more productive given the diversity of perspective in the room. So how you're defining diverse and how you think that definition of diverse will impact your business is a strategic approach that we want to focus on, as opposed to the more traditional thinking of diversity, which tends to oddly still only resonate around race.
If I can jump in, there's something that's very interesting in what the three of you have said also, is the focus, rather than on individuals, the focus on stories and audiences. And for us as managers of African talent, it's one thing to try to first of all, groom and nurture our talents and try to place them in projects that are already happening, but it might not be enough. So what we're doing actually as well is we encourage them to develop their own content, and all of them do that because they have to be multi-talented in this world. And then we actually package their own projects, and we even build projects with them that take advantage of their own skills. And so we can come out much stronger by not just telling people you should look at this person because he or she is a wonderful actor, but we can actually come with a project that is interesting, that can have, that has a business model built in, that is speaking to a particular audience. And if we look at also the type of successes in Hollywood with diverse projects, it's usually driven by the talent. It's usually driven by somebody who has been trying for years to go through all the hoops to get their projects done, whether it's women with bridesmaids or whether it's, the butler, and then someone just decides to do it. And it's their own projects that they've carried through all these years. So that's the approach we're taking also in pushing our own talents. It's to actually put them out to the world with projects that are properly packaged and properly financed and properly developed so that the end product really is exciting. And we're not asking people for work, we're actually putting a product out there.
I just want to pick up on the kind of obligatory elements of what we're doing, because, I mean, obviously it's difficult because we're all, even though we're all working within the same field, there are lots of different economies at play here. And also, I think, just kind of geographically, the makeup of our countries and the workforce that's available can be very different. But what we have noticed in the UK, at least, is that when it comes to go off screen for a while and think about crews, the crews in the UK are incredibly small. They are often kind of family units. No one actually hires. They just give the job to their nephew, or never their niece. And so we've sort of identified a kind of thoughtlessness, if you like, which is not always a kind of active thoughtlessness, but it's there nonetheless, whereby when you are crewing up an independently financed film, which is a kick, bollock and scramble at the best of times, and you've got 2 weeks to get your crew together, you don't hire anybody. So you just work with everybody that you know, and no opportunities or spaces open up. So we did feel that in those areas, we had to push people into the space of saying, look, you have got to, if you want some money from the public purse, and again, it's different because it's public money, you have got to think about who you are hiring, and you've got to demonstrate to us that you have created some opportunities for people who just cannot get in. I agree with you that we talked about this a lot with our board, just beating people with a stick and saying, you've got to do this or else, is not going to be sustainable in the long term. But what we have found so far, interestingly, and we went to the Producers Guild and we've started talking to all the unions, that actually everybody is responding very positively to being able to pass down a series of requirements to their gaffer, to their line producer, to their production manager, and say, look, they've found it quite invigorating because it's encouraged them to sort of go out and see who else is out there. So it's a difficult one saying it doesn't work, because we have found that at this stage, and we're still piloting it, it's helping.
Well, incentives, and Kay, I apologize, because I'm sure you've got questions that we're supposed to follow, but I want to be very clear about that. Incentivizing and mandates, to me, are different, and I certainly intend them differently. We were recently asked we have launched a global directors initiative, and in doing so, the guilds and other folks and reporters have spoken to us and asked us, what incentives are you offering your television shows and your other productions to hire any of the candidates who come out of the Directors Initiative? And I'm pretty certain that our legal people have since revised what I wrote, but what I wrote was our incentive is the opportunity. We're telling our shows, and I meant it, and that's why I know they've revised it. Because I typed it up and sent it back to them, that our incentive to the productions is that you are now being exposed to, under my budget, a global pool of talent beyond what you're already doing. So they're out there, they're at TIFF, they're at Cannes, they're in Sundance, they're everywhere that they should be. And now we're giving them another massive, we think, pot of phenomenal talent to choose from in the places where they aren't. And that's your incentive, is that here's something, a great pool, a great resource, creative resource that can further your efforts and grow your business that you didn't have to pay for, you didn't have to extend additional workforce to in order to cover and reach, that we're bringing to you. But I know what they were looking for was, the answer they were looking for is that we are going to pay you, we're going to underwrite the cost of the position if you hire this person. And there are a number of reasons why we cannot do that, not the least of which are certain labor laws. We can't tell people that you're definitely, if you do this initiative, if you get through, you're going to have a job. So we can't say that. So, but on top of it, there are budgetary constraints, but there are also creative constraints to think about. You wouldn't want to say to an EP, a showrunner, or a director or a producer that you better hire, you must hire this person. Not only will it piss them off, but it will also backfire. It has tended to backfire for the very pool that we're trying to introduce. But I'm in total agreement that mechanisms and strategies can be put into place through strategic partnerships, management partnerships, representation partnerships that reduce the barrier to entry that does in fact exist for a number of reasons, not the least of which include that there is no hiring. We got to move quickly, and I know you, and you. So let's make it happen. But it's the type of incentive that we want to be very thoughtful about so it doesn't end up backfiring. With our writers intensive, there was a historical position at Fox that was called the diverse writing position. And to the credit of the network and the studio, they're the only companies that literally fund the position that a diverse candidate, and by diverse, it historically meant someone of color, which typically meant a black person for some reason. It became the Hispanic person or black person or maybe Asian. And as we came into play, the audience strategy group, we asked why this position was funded as a staff writing position. And when we audited the shows and asked how many of these positions were being leveraged, taken advantage of, fewer than 50%. When we asked why that was the case, the answers varied. Predominantly, it was just a production issue where people would say, we're moving so fast, or we hire from within, and that would upset the apple cart. But we most often got, we won't have time to train that person. And I said, well, why do you assume they need training? Is it because it's a staff writing position, which is a more junior position? And then there were literally crickets, no one. Because it became a light bulb that I don't think that one necessarily thought they were a believer of, which is if they're diverse, and in our minds, diverse does not mean gender diverse, in this instance was racially diverse, then they must be green. They must be new and must need to be polished up and shaped up and brought up, and we won't have time to do it. We're not opposed to it, we won't have time. So when we ask the question, well, why do you make that assumption? There we knew that there was room for change. So the incentive is still there. The position is there, but we've rebranded it so that it's, who wants to be labeled the diverse staff hire? I mean, there comes with that so much baggage that it won't be helpful. It's the antithesis of what we wanted to create, but the position still exists. And our former chairman made a statement to me. He said, you know what, Nicole, in Hollywood, people would rather overpay for something than get it for free. And so with the position, the fact that the position was being funded was actually working against the goal. And so it's still funded, but there's a very significant criteria in order to become that position. That's part of a built-in initiative for more experienced writers who come with diverse voices, perspectives that go beyond your color and include your gender, but your region and what voice you're going to bring to the table. It's still funded, but it is no longer called the diverse staff writing position either, so that we can eradicate the biases, the unconscious biases that come with that as well. So incentive, I certainly believe in. You better or else doesn't seem to be working where I work, but this reframing of the strategy seems to be taking shape, and we're very proud of.
Karen, do you want to get in here? You haven't been able to
wanna get
participate
in
in
here?
this
Sorry.
second round.
No, it's
If you
fine.
don't,
I'm happy
I
to.
have some questions.
Why don't you start with the questions and I'll chime in if
I
have
just
answers.
wanted to jump in on the conversation because, of course, in Canada, all of our film production and television production as well starts with public funding, and there are real monetary incentives. You can get an extra $1 million for your feature film if you shoot 150 kilometers outside of Toronto. Right? There are things like that. You can get an extra $300,000 for certain things, an extra $200,000 for other things. So it's not like funding a position, but we have incentives for stories about the North, stories that involve certain kinds of diversity. We have a point system in Canada for Canadians on the crew and in the starring positions. And it seems to me that this kind of financial incentive could also work for diversity, not a token writing position, but say, how many women on the crew? If you have a certain percentage of women on the crew, you can get another so many bucks. That's the kind of thing we're hoping to get going, and that's what you've done. And
Well, it is in a way, but we're not giving anyone any more. What we're saying is, we have about 500 production applications a year, and we can support 25. So we are saying it's kind of not okay for one of those lucky few to be, an all-white male production based in London, not crewing up outside their friends and family. That's not okay with public money. And it's interesting because Tom Hooper, who directed Les Miserables and King's Speech, is on our board, and Tom and the board were very involved as we were designing this new funding approach. And Tom did say to me, you've got to be really careful, Ben, that you get the balance right between stifling creativity and encouraging diversity, because and the obvious concern is that what you're saying is, and actually it was very interesting when we announced this about a month ago, generally a very positive response. A couple of our more typically conservative newspapers just kind of ran a story saying, so from now on, with a real eye roll as if it's even a bad thing, every film's going to have, women in women in it, gay people in it. How awful! Someone in a wheelchair, and actually, what we were saying is, it's okay if a film that we want to support because creatively we want to support it because and narratively requires a guy to be running around in a wood, and that's on my mind because we do have one of those films coming to TIFF in the near future. That's okay. We can still support that film if creatively we think that's the strongest piece of material, and if for some reason or another he has to be white, which is sometimes the case, then that's okay. But as a production with a responsibility, there are other opportunities for you to look at how you can kind of diversify. So we're not saying we'll give you any more money. We'll say you stand a chance of getting some money. So it's slightly different.
Yeah. And in Canada, it's just you're eligible for more money if you fit into certain criteria.
I don't want to hog. I just want to say one positive thing, because these
Yeah.
conversations always tend to be, a little bit doom and gloom. Actually, things are not terrible, at least in the UK at the moment, in terms of women writers, women directors, women producers. Over, I think 60% of the films that we supported last year were produced by women, and about 35%. No, please don't. You don't have to. But you don't have to. Please don't applaud.
That should be normal.
It should be normal. You won't applaud this, but it's still better than average. About 35 to 40% of the projects were written and or directed by a woman. But it is remarkable how it's good. It's a good batting average. It's still not equality, but it is still remarkable. And there are a lot of women in decision-making positions, not just in the UK, in BBC Films until recently, Tessa at Film 4, but also at the studios, how it doesn't necessarily impact as much as one would hope
Yeah.
into the kind of roles that we would like to see more women in, which suggests to me that there are other issues going on besides...
Well, if I can jump on this, actually, I think one of the issues is the level of preparedness and packaging of the talents themselves. And it starts from really the very beginning, where a lot of, so whether or not we want to use that word, but diverse talent have less access to the pipeline at various levels. And as managers, what we'd love to be able to do is to bring them up so much that then it's not a question of whether there's an incentive to get that person on board, it's that you have to have that person, because that person is the best for that position, whether it's a crew position or whether it's a role that might not have been written for a black person, in our case, and then it still goes to an African actor because the person is the best for the role. So I think there's a big responsibility for everybody who's before you guys on the pipeline to do that, whether it's managers, but even film schools or any kind of training program that does not have that kind of incentives. I mean, we see this in general, education universities where they have now, initiatives to try and see that there's a regional, for example, representation, because sometimes it's the regional representation matches, racial also dynamics, so that there's more opportunities given to people from the ground up. We see that, for example, so I work mostly within 3 African countries. We're global, but the bigger ones are Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa. In South Africa, it's very much a country that still, the film industry there is still very much white, and there's lots of initiatives there to try to bring up also black filmmakers, but they start from a completely different situation where they have traditionally been less involved in schools, in the productions that have happened. They really have a lot less experience. So that's something that you need to look at from that very early level, so that it doesn't even become a question of who you should hire. You just hire the best person, but the pool of best people end up being much more diverse.
I think that's exactly right. Sorry, because something that I was actually talking to Glenn Basner, the CEO of our company, earlier today before coming here, and we were just sort of having a loose chat about this topic in particular since I was coming here. And, we've had times just because for us it's a business and we don't have public money and we're not driven by those types of agendas. We're driven by wanting to make movies that people are going to go and see, that will hopefully line our pockets and allow our doors to be open before television just swallows all of us up and we all go running into television. And so for us, it's really, we have a new movie, The Whole Truth, which Courtney Hunt is directing, and she's a woman. But when we saw the project, it's a thriller. It's tense. It's exciting, and she directed a tense and exciting, great film. And she is a great director for the movie. And it's a bonus that she's a woman, but it had no factor in the decision making of it. Or I have an action thriller that I've been trying to find a filmmaker for, and I got to know a woman named Michelle McLaren, who happens to be one of the lead directors on Breaking Bad and Game of Thrones. She's never made a feature. She is, in my opinion, and it's sad that I have to say this because I can only name one person who she's like, my whole pitch to the company was she's the next Catherine Bigelow, because I can only think of Catherine Bigelow as being one of the female filmmakers who isn't telling necessarily female-driven stories. So really for us, just on the business side, I think you're so right in that it comes down to the talent of the individual and the quality of the story that they want to tell, and whether we have a pathway to see how we as a company can make that movie, whether the financing makes sense for the scope of the film and the budget and the audience that we believe exists for it. And then we'll make it, whether it's a $2 million movie or a $40 million movie. Our next production, speaking of women and whether they're men running around the woods or not, is one of our next productions is something called Story of Your Life, which is a sci-fi film that a French-Canadian Denis Villeneuve is going to direct, and it's going to star Amy Adams, and it's an alien arrival movie. It's sci-fi, but it's not Independence Day. There's no Transformer-like costumes. There's no apocalypse. She plays a linguist, and she plays the one person who's uniquely qualified to figure out how to build a language with these aliens and figure out what they're doing here before we all sort of turn on each other and screw everything up. There's nothing really intensely female about the role, and yet there's something about it that makes it more exciting that it's a female in that role. And it's about the character. So it's not even that we said, wow, we should make a sci-fi movie with a female lead. Won't we be trailblazers if we do that? It's just because it's good, and we have to make it because it's good.
I have to.
Can I just interrupt?
Yes, 'cause I have to ask you one question.
Yeah, we all have a lot of questions, but we also want to know whether the audience has questions. It's
An
about,
hour is never enough for this.
I know, there's about 15 minutes till the end now, is that right? Yeah, so we thought that we would open it up. I got lots of questions too. Do we have questions from the audience? We're going to turn the lights on, or are the lights already on? There's one here, and one at the back, another one over here. So we go in order of hands up. Go ahead.
Okay. So my question has to do with diversity in the Canadian workplace in regards to being an actor or actress. Now, the way I've come to understand it or have heard is that there's a big incentive to hire diversity in our workplace, and that it's a hierarchy system. So if you've been working in the industry for a long time, you will continue to get work. Whereas if you're a newcomer, it's hard to break into the Canadian industry because they play it safe, so I've heard. And I just kind of wanted to hear some insight from someone who would know, as opposed to hearing rumors.
Well, I think for this panel, we really wanted to concentrate on global issues. I was throwing in the stuff about Canada just on that point of incentives. But I think what I would recommend is that you look at the CUES study, C-U-E-S. It's Canadian Union... Canadian... What? Equality on Screen. Canadian Unions for Equality on Screen. So, and they're online, and they've done a huge survey in the last year. I think the one at the back was next.
Hi. Yeah, I thank you for this panel. It's one of the more thoughtful perspectives, a range of perspectives of these panels that I've attended in a while. And one thing that's completely new about the way, as a group, you're presenting this information is this sort of undercurrent of what's called in the disability movement, which is where half of my life and work is called universal design. And when several of you were speaking about thinking in terms of a global market and what a global workforce needs to look like to respond to a global market, you're really kind of talking about something that I've never heard in these in the film industry context before, but hear all the time in the disability community, which is rather than looking at this as a piece, how do we squeeze this piece in? How do we make this space, find a little space for a wheelchair over there? But rather, how do we think of a building as being equitable and involving and acceptable and full for all of the diversity? So I just thought I'd point that out because it's really unique to this panel, and I think it's really interesting twist on getting away from the separatism and the pigeonholing.
Thank you. Was there someone else at the back? Here's one here and one here. This woman with the white on her hair. I think you have to wait for the mic because it's recorded.
Oh, sorry. I actually just wanted to hear what questions the panel was going to ask. It looked like it was about to get very heated, and I was very interested in that.
We will talk to each other all day. In the green room, it's lucky Kay could get us out here. But
I'll video it.
I will burst at the seams if I don't. Because Ben mentioned the point that there might be other things going on that, you know, you said that these conversations tend to feel kind of gloom and doom, and everyone rightfully, I think, applauded what we hope will become the norm. But and I'm hearing what Karen is saying, Marie, that I agree, but that might in and of itself, in my opinion, be part of the issue, is the way diversity is heard, perceived, and approached. And someone said this to me, and I see two of my team members here, so they're probably like, oh, yeah, I heard it already. But when we launched Audience Strategy and it was announced, I had lunch with a colleague at another company, and she said to me, and she looked just like this, and she said, so what's with Audience Strategy? I said, what do you mean? She's like, why not diversity? And I said, well, what's the problem? She said, don't you think it's going to be confusing? And her face was so screwed up and she was so like, why? That I said, well, it's obviously confusing you or bothering you, so where do you think the confusion will lie in? And she said to me, well, how will people know where to go when there's a problem? And I said, well, therein lies the problem. If you hear diversity and you are part of a diversity and inclusion initiative or department at another company, and you see diversity as a repository for problems or doom and gloom, as opposed to a place or a concept or a platform for opportunity to be as global and inclusive and no longer segregating and segmenting things in people and audiences, well, that's part of the problem. And it could very well be not the crux of it, because I certainly don't profess to have the answer, but you're right. These tend to be doom and gloom or antagonistic or fairly hostile. Why? When it should be a conversation about diversity, if you're looking at it in the true definition of it, as more. And more is opportunity. And when we talk about this as a business, in the business world where we're not getting public monies, then it's growth. And so this could be a good thing. And there is forward movement, and I would certainly be remiss in not mentioning that at Fox Searchlight, our smaller businesses or independent feature distribution platform, when Nancy Utley, the co-president, was sitting down with me and talking to me, seeking out resources to build more, she happened to mention, which I thought was unbelievably humble, which is odd in Hollywood, that, it's our 20th anniversary. And in Searchlight's 20th anniversary, they have hired 28 female directors. That's a big number for a small company that's very tight in its budgets, because it has to be. And their goal is really all about cultural specificity. And if that cultural specificity is going to resonate, the Black Swans, et cetera, and 12 Years a Slave as a distribution piece in partnership with New Regency and Beasts of the Southern Wild, and they're hiring first. And if the first happen to be a female director or sound editor or other crew, doesn't matter to them, as long as that level of cultural specificity that is lent toward the success of their brand is there, that's what they're looking for. And those are great. It goes beyond a great story. It's great business, and that's what I wanted to discuss. That's at least what I wanted to discuss, but I think I could talk to my colleagues here forever about multiple issues.
We had a couple more questions over here, and then back there, and then in the second row with the white arm back. So 1, 2, 3 that I see so far.
And then him.
Just with, as a business, viewing, bringing in more diverse voices as a business. Say as a Canadian, Native person, Native American, we make up, say, 1.5, 3.4% of the population. In looking at us as an audience, as a potential audience, how would, as filmmakers, we say, our story is valuable, please don't look at the business model in terms of how big our audience is. How can we, I just don't want to be excluded when it comes to, how can we guarantee that smaller populations with awesome stories won't be excluded?
I think if I can speak to that, if it's a great story, it will get out there. And it really just becomes a ratio of, if you don't have some huge high concept film, movie stars, those things that tend to encourage companies like ours to make bigger budgets and that we're able to sell them and distribute them around the world for more money, it really just becomes a level of how much money to make to tell that story. Because if it's a great story, it will find an audience, and whether that's through, Fox Searchlight has been an incredible company in terms of platform releasing and getting the word out on movies to the point where they become global hits, or whether it's, there's so many different outlets for building an audience for a movie now, both online and television. I'm not going to get into a conversation about day and date releases, but there's so many different ways to do it that I don't think anyone ever looks at a story and says, well, that just can't be told because it's from this audience or this filmmaker. I think it's really assessed on, is this exciting? Is it interesting? Will people want to watch it? And that's really where it starts.
Yeah. We only have 4 minutes left, and there was a question ahead of you, I'm sorry, at the back. Yeah, over there in the middle with the white T-shirt. Yes, you, sir.
Hi, I just wanted to say that I appreciate the conversation that you're having here and also the Toronto Film Festival. So it encompasses the diversity that you're talking about. And I also think that generally our concept of diversity, as Ms. Bernard was saying, is framed probably in the wrong way, and that if we really consciously think about it, that the majority of people on the planet aren't very diverse peoples. And because of history, and we don't always think of it with that idea of how diverse we are. We think of it more kind of as a Eurocentric point of view for a variety of reasons. But that said, as the woman was saying with regards to indigenous people, well, if you look at indigenous peoples all around the world, instead of just the idea of 3% in Canada and a few percent in the United States, then these numbers mean something. And most importantly, the diversity of stories means something. And I appreciate, like I say, all of the work that you all are doing and the conversation you're having, and the work that Ms. Bernard is doing in terms of the success that they've had there with Fox Searchlight and also with shows like Sleepy Hollow that have become tremendously successful based on incorporating that diversity, which becomes a part of the creative diversity of the storytelling as well that the audiences respond to. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Our time is up. It's always great to end with a statement from somebody from the audience that sums up everything for the panel, and I don't have to do it. I'll just say thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for being a good audience. Good night.
Thank you, Kay, and thank you to all of you for this wonderful discussion. We'll have only 15-minute turnaround time until our next session, Moguls with Oren Moverman, so stick around.